Well, as Liz said, I'm Scott Newell. I'm the Alfalfa Outreach Specialist here at UW-Madison. First off, just wanted to take an opportunity here to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us here. I know it's getting to be a pretty busy time of the year, lots of things going on, so we appreciate you tuning in and really appreciate the opportunity here. So as Liz said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how to set yourself up for success with alfalfa this spring, pieces on winter, just kind of a general overview of what this winter looked like for us alfalfa-wise, stand evaluation, looking at winter survival, doing a little bit of talk about spring seeding, things that you ought to be looking at and thinking about there. How to meet your quality targets. That's a really important piece of your first harvest cutting schedule. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about other things to plan ahead for going into the year when it relates to alfalfa. So just kind of a recognition that we're all busy and maybe not everyone's thinking about all these things all the time. So just bringing some of these up to the forefront of your mind and you can put them on your radar, put them on your calendar. So first thing I'll talk about here is alfalfa winter kill. So as far as I've heard, we haven't had widespread winter kill across the state. It's been a pretty okay winter this year for alfalfa, which was a relief. It was a little bit concerning there when we had February warming up quite a bit. And, at that point in time, I wasn't sure if we were just going to get a massive cold snap and go way down below zero and not have any snow cover, especially after having a little bit of potential regrowth from some stands. That could really whack us. But we didn't see a whole lot of that as far as I've heard across the state. But your mileage may vary in that. So just a few things to look at that might affect you there. So temperatures below 0 degrees Fahrenheit can cause winter kill. That's kind of the traditional version of winter kill where you've got extreme low temperatures. Snow cover helps a lot in helping alfalfa weather that. And in a lot of parts of the state, we did have reasonable snow cover when we had those real cold temperatures in January. But I know some areas didn't necessarily. That being said, modern varieties do have a lot better winter survival these days than they did in the past. And I would say a lot of our winter injury comes more from these prolonged periods of wet, cold temperatures in the spring, in the early spring, where we get rotting of the crown and a lot of susceptibility to hypoxia from the alfalfa. Other factors that could have affected you, ice sheeting. Don't think we had much of that this year because we just didn't have the moisture. Heaving's another one, same deal. Those prolonged cold wet periods, as I mentioned, are a big one that can cause crown rot and hypoxia. And yeah, that's kind of a saving grace of us being in a drought this winter, is that we didn't have these kind of cold temperatures that we had where the soil wasn't frozen, weren't also matched by having waterlogged soils. So actually, it's been a pretty good spring and winter as far as I've heard. Last factor that can affect your winter kill is stand age. Of course, the older the stand, the more susceptible to winter kill that stand is. So just a few things to look out for if those factors have happened in your area and you haven't been out and scouted your field, it might be worth going out and taking a look at that. So just as a couple of examples here for you of this early green up that we saw, this was a field that was seeded in the fall of 2023. This was March 15th. I took a picture out there when we had some nice warm temperatures in March, and then a few days later we had some below freezing temperatures. You can see that those top leaves have been frozen off, stunted back a little bit, but that didn't really seem to hurt the alfalfa too much. Here it is about a month later. Same field, and it's looking pretty good this time of year. Same thing with established fields. They're just about as susceptible to that cold. This actually had a little bit less damage from that frost that came through, and again, greening up just fine. This is about 6 inches tall now. So what can you actually do to go and look at this stuff? The best tool that we have for evaluating your stands really is the stand count. It's a little bit of a tedious process, but we'll walk through how you can use it to your advantage and make some management decisions based off of that. So you really do have to schedule a time to go out and do this. It's not something where you can go out and look at your field and get a gut reaction. And maybe if it's a newer stand, you can get a pretty good feel for how dense that stand is. But as a stand starts to thin down, gets fewer plants per square foot, it really is a good idea to go out there and count those stems individually. So what you're going to be looking for to do is you get yourself or make yourself one of these little PVC rings. Those are about 17 inches by 17 inches. That gives you 2 square feet, just a little bit more accurate measurement for you to measure a wider area. You want to count in various locations across your field. Make sure you're being representative. Don't just walk into the field where the field entry is and throw the square down and count there, because you probably have more traffic there. Maybe someone took a joyride in the corner of the field in the 4-wheeler, and if that's the case, you ought to go talk to that person about that and maybe tell them to knock it off. They're costing you money. But go out into a representative area of the field where you don't have damage from management like that. But don't be, at the same time, you do want to be truly random with this, and that's why we take multiple samples, is to be random with where you're counting stands. So what you're looking for is a target of above 55 stems per square foot. That's going to give you the optimum yield potential from that alfalfa stand. And lower than that, you can start to have effects on yield. So if you're at, say, 40 to 55 stems per square foot, you might see about a 30% or around a 20 to 30% decrease in yield potential. And below that 40 threshold, you're starting to get a lot less yield productivity. And you may want to be thinking about alternatives to that stand, whether that's greening it up with grasses or terminating that stand to plant in a crop and take advantage of those nutrient credits. So those are some things to look for when you're doing stand counts. It's a fairly simple process. It takes, last time I did it, I timed myself, it took between 2 and 3 minutes to do a single one. So, if you schedule yourself an hour or 2 hours to go out on a nice morning, beautiful day like today, it's not such a hardship, is it? And I think the most important thing to remember when you're doing alfalfa stand assessments is to have fun. This is my colleague Josh Camps. He's out there throwing the Frisbee. And this is how we recommend that you get a random sample in the field. So you do want to toss that sampling ring and make sure that you're getting a random spot and not just picking and choosing the best spot, because you're only shooting yourself in the foot if you do that. Next thing you'll want to look at for particularly older stands that are more than 2 years old, you'll want to do an assessment of crown health. So here I have picked out some pictures from crown health rating that was put together by Dan Understander a few years back. And basically what you're looking for here is over the life of a stand, generally that crown, basically as that crown gets bigger, the stems generally come from the outside, and the center of the stem will start to exhibit some rot. So you can see even in this 0 rating at the very center of the stem, when it's split open, there's a little bit of rot there on the surface. And basically what we're seeing here as you go up these ratings, and obviously 5 is a dead plant, but as you can see in this intermediate 3 rating, you're getting a little bit of that rot kind of going into the crown, into the taproot. And you'll see that when you split those stems open. Sometimes you'll see crowns that have only are growing on one side of the crown and not uniformly around the crown. And that can cause some damage to the stand as well. So really important when you're doing these spring assessments to be digging up some crowns as well, getting an understanding for the health of your stand, because you can have high stand counts this spring, but it would be useful to know as you're doing some of your planning for this season and the next one, it would be good to know what the overall health of the stand is too. And this is a good way to do that. So you're just digging up some plants in those within that same square after you've done your stem count, dig up a plant or two in there, split it open, and take a look. And there's some good information in this guide. I have a bunch of links to all these things at the end of my presentation, so you can pull those up. And I believe an aggregating link has been posted in the chat as well. So again, more damage to the crown can mean that they're more susceptible to loss. So maybe it's not going to be, maybe you have good enough stems this year, stem counts this year, so you're going to get adequate yield, but it could mean that you're more at risk in the coming winter. And of course, if you do decide to terminate your stand, you're going to want to take advantage of those nutrient credits that you're going to get from alfalfa. And basically, this has been put together by University of Wisconsin Extension, and basically relates regrowth on the top regrowth of the alfalfa, as well as the stand density, to give you a good idea of how much nitrogen credit you can take for the following year stand. And one thing to note when you're looking at these, oftentimes there's a second year credit to crops from an alfalfa stand that's sort of buried in the footnotes. So just make sure to take a look at that, and pay attention to those numbers as well, so that you're getting the most out of this alfalfa crop as in terms of benefits to your next crops. And then if you're replanting, if you decide, a stand really isn't good enough and it's time to terminate that this spring, one thing that you could look into is this growing successful late summer and spring planted forages. Again, that's in that link that was sent in the chat. That's just a really good overview of various forage options in Wisconsin and how to establish them, specifically following alfalfa termination. So let's move on a little bit to activities this spring. So as far as spring seeding goes, for those of you who are looking to do that, or maybe you've already started, but you should be, in general, keeping in mind to prepare a good seed bed, fine, smooth, and firm. And you want minimal trash on that seed bed if you're using a Brilliant style seeder. No-till drills can be really effective, especially into something like soybean stubble. You can get a really good stand out of that as long as you're ensuring good seed to soil contact. But you can get a nice stand out of something like that. One thing that I put in here that my colleague said to me the other day was, you'll have to drive on it for years. So just remember that when you're preparing your seed bed, you want to make sure that this is a good field surface that you're going to be able to do all the operations you need to in that field over the coming years. As far as seeding depth, you're aiming for about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch for optimum emergence. And I'll highlight this bit a little bit later, but watch out for residual herbicide risk as well. That could be a potential challenge in some of our fields following corn and soy especially. As far as seeding rate goes, generally speaking, you're going to see greater establishment success using high quality treated seed. Generally, those are going to have a rhizobium inoculant in them or coated on them as well, and some sort of fungicide. That fungicide doesn't last very long, but it does help at the very beginning stages and can be useful against things like Pythium. And you're going to want to adjust your seeder for around 15 pounds per acre for optimum yield. That fluctuates a little bit in recommendations across various states in the upper Midwest, anywhere between 12 and 17 pounds, but 15 is a good target to shoot for. And seed is expensive, but in the end, it's not the most expensive insurance you could have. And then just, the last thing in there is more seed does not necessarily mean greater yield. So don't push it beyond that 15 to 20 range. You're not going to see a whole lot of return from doing something like that. All right. Oops. So moving on to ways to manage stands that are already established. So, you're going to really want to just want to stress the importance of that first cutting. That first cut is 35 to 40% of your yield, 45% of your yearly yield. That's data borne out by our Wisconsin alfalfa yield and persistence trial data, where we've actually looked at that on farm. So it's a really important crop for you. And, this is going to be probably your, the cutting where you're balancing quality and yield the most. You might be fighting against other things keeping you busy that mean you're not going to be able to get out into the field, but that quality can start to deteriorate fast on you if you're not paying attention to it. If you're on a dairy or if you're managing for a dairy, it's good to ask your nutritionist for what their targets are as a guide. But just remember that greater quality does mean less yield. So if they're shooting for rocket fuel, just know that that does have a potential cost on your stand, that you're going to lose yield by doing something like that. And then potentially, if you continue a very aggressive cutting schedule, you're not going to be letting that plant recover root carbohydrates and be better equipped to persist longer. So it's a balancing act, but good to know what you're meant to be shooting for. If you're not on a dairy operation or working with a nutritionist, kind of a baseline target for dairy forage from University of Wisconsin and Minnesota is around 150 to 160 RFQ. And just remember always to account for your harvesting losses. Those can be around 15% from field to bunker. So therefore aim to cut around 185 RFQ. How do you actually know when you're at that point? So as you can see here, RFQ falls with stand maturity. That's what I was talking about earlier. That's that quality and yield trade-off. So the other line on this graph would be yield going the other way, going up over time. So how do you actually monitor that? Well, actually taking a cutting physically in the field, sending that off for lab testing is the gold standard. But that can be a little bit expensive and time consuming. So a method was developed, the predictive equation for alfalfa quality. That's shortened to PEAK because we love a good acronym. And this is a good tool for estimating quality. It can be very predictive in some years, but it does have some variability. So something to look out for. 2024 may be a year where PEAK is a little less predictive due to our slightly abnormal conditions this year in terms of growth. When you're using PEAK, you're taking a measurement at random in a quadrat. So again, you're going to take your quadrat out, go play some Frisbee, maybe send your kid out. That could be a fun thing for them to do too. And you're going to want to identify the growth stage of the most mature stem in that quadrat. Then measure the height of that stem and use the chart on the side here. And this is available on our website as well to estimate the feeding value. And then, so basically you can treat PEAK as sort of a litmus test. And maybe if you're really wanting to manage quality with a very fine-tooth comb, you use that PEAK as kind of a triggering point. This is what we do with a lot of forage councils in the state of Wisconsin, is we use the PEAK stick to monitor, and then that's a triggering point for when we're going to go out and actually sample and take fresh cuttings and send them off to the lab. So if you are going to be doing a scissor clip, you can sample about 1/2 pound of fresh material, cut at whatever your preferred mower height is. I say about 3 inches, and then send that off to the lab for analysis. We do have if you're looking for this data within your area, you could reach out to your local forage council. They may have a program going where they collect this data and publish that out. That is kind of a good idea of what's happening around you, is probably what's happening in your field as well, because we're all dealing with very similar growing conditions. And so looking at your forage councils and as well in the links that have been sent out, there's a page where the University of Wisconsin puts the results for all of our PEAK scissor clip trials that we're a part of. And if you are going out and taking these measurements yourself and you want to collaborate with University of Wisconsin Extension in collecting those measurements, you can get in touch with myself or Kevin Jarek as well. So let's just think about, last things here, planning ahead for the coming year. It's never too early to be thinking about winter survival. We just came out of a fairly good winter, all things considered, for alfalfa, but it's not too early to start thinking about next winter. And really, it's a shift in your frame of reference from managing annual crops to you're really managing the life of an alfalfa crop. So if you maximize your yield potential in 1 year and maximize your profit margins in 1 year by not applying any fertilizer and taking an aggressive cutting schedule, you could be hurting your overall bottom line over the course of that whole stand life. So one of the main things to look for there, or that I look for there, is good fertilizer management, especially with potassium. Alfalfa is a large potassium user, but it is also very important to winter survival. So something to look at, keep on top of. It's just like I'm thinking about having my summer body ready for going to the beach, which by the way is not going super well because I didn't start early enough. If you just fertilize in the fall right before the winter, you're not going to see an effect from that fertilizer for winter survival from that potassium. So start thinking about it now. Get that fertilizer on after the first cutting, and you should see some benefits from that in the coming winter to winter survival. Um, Consider, and other things to look out for as we come into the season. Consider your cutting height. Make sure you're looking at your equipment, that you're not going to be cutting too low. Should be around 3 inches for alfalfa. That'll give a little bit faster regrowth from some of those stems that are left, still having some growing points that can shoot off, and also helps to minimize ash, which is something, of course, cows don't make milk on dirt. So minimizing the amount of ash that's getting into the forage is important. Equipment checks. I think Brian Luck is going to be talking a little bit about some of that too. But specifically, all of your harvest equipment, when you get to harvest time, like I said earlier, that quality can go down quickly. So if you're at your quality target and you didn't realize that your merger's broken or something's wrong, you haven't replaced blades on your mower, and you've got downtime due to that, you'll be losing quality from that downtime. And as it's such a big part of your yearly yield, that equipment downtime can be fairly costly. So just put that on your list of things to do, your ever-growing list of things to do, of take some time to make those equipment checks. And then just now is a good time also to consider how your schedule of cutting may impact your stand. If you're always pushing quality, you may be limiting the root reserves that it can build up. One of the ways to mitigate that is to take one of those lower yielding cuttings, like the third or fourth cutting, usually a much higher quality cutting anyways, and let that go a little bit further into bloom. That'll help replenish root stores and increase survival. Here's a little bit of guidance on the fertilization. This is some really good stuff, I think, from University of Minnesota. A lot of recommendations are based off of takeoff, which I think is a good place to start. But we ought to be thinking about what's already in our soil, so we're not over fertilizing as well, because that obviously can cause issues in our larger agricultural system. So this is a good place to start, taking your expected yield and your soil test values and coming up with what you should actually be applying. Just as a note, split applying your potash will be helpful. If you're over 150 pounds per acre recommended, split applying could be a good way to minimize damage to the stand. Last couple of things to look out for: residual herbicide damage is becoming more of a common thing in Wisconsin as we have more pre-emerge active ingredients to beat resistant weeds. Many of these have restrictions for rotation and may cause injury, and they need moisture to break down, which was lacking in 2023. The mild winter did definitely help there, but it's good to double check your records and labels before planting. As well, insect pests, the mild winter probably didn't kill alfalfa weevils. If you've got alfalfa weevil in your fields last year, it's probably a good time to scout early. And that's a good call to action for that insect pest text alert too. And it could be an early migration year for potato leafhopper as well, due to warmer springs down further south. And here's a little sheet that Dr. Mark Renz and I here at UW have put together to give you a little bit of information on some very common corn herbicides. This is available in those links that have been posted. And for a more comprehensive list as well, UW and NPM have put together a larger list covering a lot more herbicides in the state and a lot more crops as well. And that's about it, I think, for my time here. I'll skip over some of this insect pest test alert because that was already mentioned. And just one last thing that you can use for that insect forecasting, using this insect forecasting model to kind of understand when's a good time to go and scout in your area, can be a really useful tool. So with that, I thank you all for your time. And all those links are available here if you scan this QR code. And again, it should be posted in the chat when you get a chance. Basically everything that I've talked about here has been aggregated there as well. All right, thank you.